Doing business globally sounds pretty easy, right? You've got a product, they've got customers. Simple. But the reality? It's way, way more complicated. Imagine you're trying to play a game, but every single person at the table has a completely different rule book. That is the fundamental challenge of international business. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack those hidden rule books and see how the smartest companies learn to play and win the game. And this quote from Indra Nooyi, the former rock star CEO of PepsiCo, just nails the central tension. On one side, you have the absolute need to make a profit. But on the other, there's this growing pressure for huge companies to actually be a force for good in the world.
So that's the big question, isn't it? How do companies actually walk this tightrope? How do they navigate this minefield of different rules and ethical gray areas to not only make money, but to be responsible global citizens? That's what we're going to dig into.
To really get our heads around this, we're going to look at a company that lives and breathes this challenge every single day, PepsiCo. Honestly, they're like a masterclass in this global balancing act.
Look at what they're up against. This shows you that going global isn't just about running cool ads. Think about it. In a massive market like India, they need the government's permission just to invest more of their own money. In China, you don't just set up shop. You have to build alliances and play by their rules. And you've got to do all this while trying to be seen as a good guy, a model corporate citizen everywhere you go. It's a really complex dance.
So how on earth does a company like PepsiCo even start to understand all these different rule books? Well, the best way to think about it is that every single country has its own unique operating system that controls how everything works.
Now, the technical term for this operating system is political economy. It's this mashup of a country's politics, its economy, and its laws. And that combination is what creates the unique business environment, the specific set of rules that every company has to follow. Let's break down the big pieces.
First up, politics. And you can really think of it as a spectrum. On one end, you have democracies. Here, things are generally more stable and predictable for businesses thanks to things like free speech and property rights. But on the other end of that spectrum, you've got totalitarianism. And with that kind of centralized control, the rules can literally change overnight. That creates a huge political risk for any company trying to operate there.
Next is the economic system. And this really boils down to a fundamental conflict. A market economy is all about private ownership and competition. It's super efficient, but it can also lead to massive gaps between the rich and poor. On the other hand, a centrally planned economy, where the government makes all the calls, aims for equality. But this usually leads to major inefficiencies. The reality is, most countries today are some kind of mix of the.
Okay, now for the third piece of that operating system, the actual rule book itself. This is where we get into the legal minefields that companies have to tiptoe through every single day.
You know, broadly speaking, there are two dominant legal systems out there. In a common law country, like the US or the UK, the law is built on tradition and what judges have decided in the past. This means your business contracts have to be insanely detailed to cover every single possibility. But in a civil law country, which is common in Europe, the law is all written down in a detailed code. So the code has the answers, and contracts can be much simpler. That's a huge practical difference for any business.
And here's where things get really, really interesting. Because sometimes the biggest threats to your business aren't written down in any law book. They're part of the unofficial, unwritten rules of the game. Take a look at this number, $52 billion. What do you think that represents? It's the estimated annual cost of just one of these unofficial problems.
That number? That's the cost of business software piracy. And this is a perfect illustration of the risk. In some countries, sure, there are official laws to protect your ideas, your intellectual property. But in practice, if those laws aren't enforced, they might as well not exist. For a company whose value is tied up in its ideas, that's a massive, off-the-books risk.
And let's add another layer to that risk, corruption. This map gives you a sense of where bribery is, well, an expected part of doing business. This creates enormous legal and ethical headaches for any global company. So the billion-dollar question is, how do you even begin to navigate all this?
This brings us beyond the black and white pages of the law books and into the really challenging gray areas of ethics. Because as any global manager will tell you, some of the absolute toughest decisions have nothing to do with the law.
This right here is the fundamental challenge. Just because something is legal in a certain country, like paying incredibly low wages or ignoring environmental standards, doesn't automatically mean it's the right thing to do.
Now, to navigate these tricky situations, managers often lean on different ethical philosophies, sometimes without even realizing it. You've got the Friedman Doctrine at one extreme. The business of business is business. Just make money, period. Then there's cultural relativism, the classic when in Rome approach, where you just adapt to whatever the local norms are. On the flip side, you have righteous moralism, which basically says our way is the right way and applies home country ethics everywhere. And finally, utilitarianism, which tries to do the math and figure out what does the most good for the most people. Each one gives you a totally different way to look at a problem.
And these dilemmas are brutally real. Do you pay that little bribe to get your stuff through customs? What's your responsibility for the working conditions in a supplier's factory that's thousands of miles away? Should you even be doing business in a country with a terrible human rights record? These aren't just textbook questions. These are the high-stakes decisions that keep global managers up at night.
So, with this incredibly complex landscape of politics, economics, law, and ethics, what's the modern playbook? How do the best companies not just survive, but thrive? Well, it comes down to a whole new way of thinking about what a business is for.
It's called Corporate Social Responsibility, or CSR. And the core idea is that companies voluntarily go beyond what the law requires. They're actively trying to balance making a profit with making a positive impact on society and the planet.
Now, what I love about this pyramid is how it frames the whole idea. It's not about choosing between profit and purpose. Look at the foundation, economic responsibility. You have to be profitable to survive, and you have to obey the law. But the great companies build on top of that foundation with ethical and philanthropic responsibilities.
And that brings us right back around. This was PepsiCo's motto under Indra Nooyi. It is the perfect summary of the modern approach. Achieve top-tier financial performance, of course, but do it with a purpose that creates value for society at the same time.
So here it is, the big takeaway. The old way of thinking, where being ethical was just another cost on the balance sheet, that's dead. Today, the smartest companies understand that building trust, protecting your reputation, and being the kind of place people are proud to work for, that isn't a cost. That's one of the most powerful competitive advantages you can possibly have.
And that leaves us with one last thought. And this one isn't for the companies, it's for us. In this giant, complex global system, every single purchase we make is a vote. It's a vote for a certain kind of supply chain, for a certain set of values. The question is, what kind of world are you voting for?